Well, hello, everybody. I'm here with my friend, my really, really close friend, and my dog's best friend. And her name is Leah Bergen. And the reason I want to do this podcast with you, Leah, is because you're interesting, because you're smart, and you've had like a really interesting life. But one part of your interesting life is that Leah, everybody, is a real chef, not me making something and saying, well, I'll put this in instead or whatever. I didn't know how to make bread, and I'd been making bread for a year until Leah said, what are you doing? But welcome, Leah, to the podcast of my life, the dessert course of my life.
Thank you, Betty.
My pleasure. You know why I call it the dessert course of my life?
Why?
Because Walter Isaacson, who's a writer who's written Steve Jobs biography, he's written biographies of really, really, really interesting people, and the biographies are brilliant. And he did his latest one was Leonardo da Vinci, and someone said, you could have done Leonardo da Vinci 20 years ago. He's dead. I mean, nothing new happened. And he said, oh, no, I saved Leonardo da Vinci for the dessert course of my career. And this is the dessert course of my life.
Uh-huh.
So Leah.
So Betty.
How did this all get started? This chefdom.
Chefdom started in a really peculiar fashion. I mean, my mother was from Italy, came to the United States when she was 30 after the war. So she had been in hiding all during the war, and my dad was a concentration camp survivor.
Where was she in hiding?
What?
Where was she in hiding?
She was in various places, but eventually it was a lawyer, a non-Jewish lawyer, his wife and kids, who took care of her and one of her brothers and saved them, basically. But anyway, after everything all was over, my parents met, and
your father was a survivor.
My father is a survivor of the Holocaust. He was liberated in May of 1945. And then they were sending people to Italy to the Americans, basically, who were in Italy, and trying to figure out what to do with them, basically. And my dad and my mom got married in 1947. And my brother was born in January of 48. And then one day my father came home and said, we're moving to America. I have the visas. And my mother, whose entire family was in Rome, and she hadn't lost anybody in the war in her immediate family, extended family, yes, but not immediate family. And she didn't want to leave because she was 4 or 5 months pregnant with me. My brother was kind of sickly, but my dad wanted to go. And so they went.
How did they go?
They went by ship. They were in a DP, a displaced persons camp. But the ship stopped in Bremen in Germany.
Oh,
my mother was a nervous wreck.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what was going on with my dad. He never talked about it, but they had to stay in somebody's house for a few days. In Germany, because my brother was sick and she was sick. And when she was, brought into this place to stay for a couple of nights, there was a framed photo of the man, the owner guy, in his Nazi uniform.
Wide open.
Right. My mother just freaked out. But they didn't do anything to them. I mean, they just, took care of them in the way they needed to. They fed them, basically.
How long did they stay there?
I don't know. I don't think it was certainly under a week.
Oh, okay. But still, I mean, that's with the devil.
right. And then they, they made it to the United States on these visas. They came by ship. And, they get dumped off in New York. But my mother her older brother, Alberto, had moved to the United States in, I think it was 1938 or 39.
Before the war.
In World War II. Yeah. So, and he left because Mussolini had already passed the racial laws, and that meant that Jews couldn't do anything. You couldn't own property. You couldn't have Aryans working for you. You couldn't have any official position of any kind. You couldn't go to school. You couldn't do anything, basically. And this particular uncle had been the managing director of a bank. And went to work one day and they said, sorry, you got to go. And three of the sisters, my mother had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. And so 3 of the sisters were all already teaching school. I mean, they had been school teachers, but they weren't allowed to teach in the regular schools. So they set up their own schools. And so they were teaching. Yeah. And my uncle said, no, I'm going. And he wound up in Cuba. I don't know how, but he wound up in Cuba. His wife and his 2 sons were still in Rome. And he met some guy, and this was in Jersey City now. He goes to Jersey City, he meets this man agrees to sponsor him. And then he has to go to Cuba for basically some kind of graft thing had to happen. He had, the diamonds in the lining of his coat, and, that whole thing was true. And so he paid somebody off, and he paid off a judge in Jersey City, which probably wasn't very difficult to do, considering Jersey City. And so he managed to get in. He obviously couldn't get a job in a bank. He wound up being a milkman. And then he managed my aunt, his wife, and the 2 babies, managed to get on the last ship that left Italy before the blockade completely shut everything down.
Wow.
So they made it by the skin of their teeth. But the rest of my mother's family was just all still in Rome. They had been in Rome forever, hundreds of years. And
aren't there streets named after your last name?
Yeah, there's a piece that the last name is Anguillara, and there's a part of the Tevere, Lungo Tevere, which is like the boulevard that runs along the Tiber River, and it's called Lungo Tevere degli Anguillara. And then there's a tower, an Anguillara Tower, but we have no idea how that came to be. I mean, maybe there was another Anguillara who was, a famous somebody else, but we weren't famous. We had a clothing store
in Rome.
In Rome. But anyway, so my parents came to the United States, and then there's a long story of me, figuring out what it was to be an American. We spoke Italian at home, English in school. My brother was, sent right to like pre-kindergarten, and he didn't speak a word of English. And because he was, 3.5, 4.5. And when he went to kindergarten, I believe he was still not speaking very well.
Well, that must have been tough.
Yeah.
Bringing kids and
Right. But somehow all of these things brought me to becoming a chef. I mean, I was in graduate school in English literature. I was working on my doctorate, actually.
On what?
And I caught the varsity. What was that?
What was the doctorate going to be about?
English literature.
Uh-huh.
And I was in a Big Ten school, and I had a great fellowship. And I had this one kid in my class who was like a big giant lumbering monster. He was the varsity quarterback of the football team,
Oh
even though he was
my.
only a freshman in this Big Ten school. And I mean, he couldn't even write a sentence. And he had grown up on his parents' sugar beet farm in North Dakota or someplace up there. And I caught him plagiarizing a paper, right? He was writing like the final paper or something for the class. And I was grading papers with another teaching assistant. And she said, "Oh, I know that one. I got that last year from another athlete."
No.
Yeah. So apparently the athletic department was just like
Yeah.
distributing.
They were in, yeah, they were in on
Yeah,
it.
they were in on it. And so I failed him. And that was not very well liked. I got first the kid came at me, and I had a side job pumping gas in a gas station because I
No.
needed to earn more money.
Right.
And he came to the gas station in his cut off overalls
Oh
and
Lord.
hulking over me. He was really, I'm 5'4". He was like 6'3" or something. And he started threatening me. And I just picked up the hose, the gasoline
No, you
hose.
did not.
I did.
You
And I
sprayed her.
just pointed it at him, and I
Oh,
said, "Get the hell out of here."
right.
And so then he apparently went and talked to the coach, who talked to the athletic director. All of them said that I had to pass him. And I said, the poor guy, he can't write a sentence. And they didn't care. His brother had also been a varsity quarterback on that team, but now he was wheeling around the university in a wheelchair because he had been injured. And so there was like this big movement. And then my thesis advisor dropped me.
Oh,
Yeah, because he thought that I was, a troublemaker, which I have always been. I can't, fault him for that. But and then the only person who said they would back me up was the head of the English department, and she was the first woman to be chair of a department in that entire university of 45,000 students.
wow.
And so when she said, "I'll go to bat for you," I said, "Please don't, because I don't want to risk you, getting into hot water and losing what is really a very significant position compared to me." I mean, I was doing lots of things that were causing trouble in that school. I helped put together a women's shelter. All kinds of things. And it was in the Midwest, and they didn't know what to do with me. So I finally just quit and moved to Chicago and worked as a copy editor for the American Medical Association on their scientific journals. And then and I was hanging around this group of women, and one day one of them said, "Let's move to California," because they knew, she knew this group of women who were already in California. And so myself, the woman I was living with, and 3 other women, we bought the biggest U-Haul that they will rent. You needed to have a Class C license, and, well, who knows why they gave it to us, but they did. One of the women had to bring her baby grand piano. And so we just threw everything in there. We had one of the women who actually wanted to start this whole thing. We flew her out to California. It was to Oakland, basically, in Northern California. And she found apartments for each of us because none of us wanted to live together. We weren't that close.
Right.
And so that's how I wound up in California. I was there for 40 years, on and off. But anyway, the cooking thing came later. I was several years after that. I was living in, I was camping with a friend of mine, and in, the Volkswagen bus. It was, 1976 or something.
Oh, yeah.
And we were camping on the Yuba River in Northern California. And we were having a great time. Her Volkswagen bus, the dog, the cat, we're all camping on this river, and then we get completely rained out. And the dog is soaked, the cat is soaked, the van is soaked. And so, we took everything and went to the nearest laundromat, because we were in Nevada City at that point. That was the nearest town. And Nevada City is a little tourist town. So, as our clothes are drying, we're walking around this. There's one main street, basically. And we're walking around this street, and there was this aroma of Constant Comment tea that kind of was coming out of this one pottery shop. So we went in, because the idea of having hot tea was excellent.
Yeah.
And, I started talking to the woman who was there, who was a very quirky artist. And she made custom rag dolls that looked like whoever you wanted it to look like.
Wow.
And she was very talented, but it was very scary, right? She made one of me, and I was like, oh, this is really, I know we're going to stick pins in this or what? But anyway, we got along really well, and she was very nice, and she took care of us that night. She invited us to her house for dinner, and her husband was also very nice, and they lit a fire in the fireplace, and they made us dinner, and we were sitting around talking, and of course we had no place to stay, so she invited us to stay over that night. And in the morning, so I've known this woman now for, I don't know, 12 hours. And her name was Pam DeGaines. And Pam decided to take us out for breakfast to this little restaurant that had a creek running through it. And it was like right the main corner of town. And it was really sweet. And, we're sitting down, ordering our breakfast from the owner, because the owner obviously knew this woman, Pam, because they both own businesses there. And she says to him, I hear you have a big problem in the kitchen. He said, oh my gosh, the chef quit, and he went back to the city, and now I have no one, and there's nobody up here who can do this. And this woman, who I've known for 12 hours, says, well, this is just such a coincidence, because this is my old friend Leah, who just moved here from Chicago, where she was a chef in the Cactus Flower restaurant.
She made up everything.
Everything. There was a Cactus Flower restaurant in Chicago, and I had had a cup of soup there once. I couldn't have any more because it was too expensive, right. But that was it. And the guy hired me on the spot. He didn't ask me for references. He didn't ask to see my resume. He didn't ask what kind of a cook I was. He didn't ask me anything. He just said, when can you start?
Desperate.
So, right. So I started a week later. Now I was living in Oakland, California, with this woman, and we went back to Oakland, packed up a bunch of stuff for me. We drove it back, and the guy had given me his office to use as a little apartment until I could get settled. And
Leah, this is my jaws dropped again. Oh my God. So hurry up.
And so, I get there, and the next day, the guy says, well, why don't you start tomorrow? And I go in, and, they had chef's coats. So I put on my white chef's coat, and And I didn't know what to do. I had never been in a restaurant kitchen. I had never seen a walk-in refrigerator. I didn't know anything, literally nothing. The only advantage I had was A, my mother was from Italy and Italians all know how to cook something. And B, a friend of mine, the mother of a friend of mine, as a college graduation present years before, had given me a copy of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 1, Julia Child's
Right.
first book. And I had never used it. I never had used cookbooks, so I didn't have a clue. And so I went in and the guy said, well, why don't you just, it's your first day, just make soup and dessert. I thought, all right, that can't be too hard, right? And then I said, how many portions? How much soup should I make? And he said, oh, just about 100 portions of each. But I was like, 100? 100? If you had said 10, I could have gotten my head around, but 100? And so I excused myself. I went into my little apartment, the office,
Right.
and I took out Julia Child and I looked things. I just started skimming through the book. I went and looked at the walk-in refrigerator and I saw a big case of mushrooms. So I took Julia's recipe for cream of mushroom soup, multiplied by 25,
Right.
because it was for 4 people.
Oh my gosh. Did you get mixed
And
up? Yeah.
right. But the fact that it was Julia meant that it actually worked.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with the dessert. I picked out a chocolate orange mousse because I didn't know how to bake. I had never baked. And, I could make cookies, maybe, if I followed the directions on the Toll
Right.
House bag, right? And so, but I made the mousse for 100 portions and it turned out really well. And that was it. That was how I started. That was the beginning of my career. And I hope the guy never hears this podcast, which is why I haven't mentioned the name of his restaurant.
Did he get annoyed with you?
No, they had a weird system going on. They had a weird cooking thing. They would make 5-gallon buckets of different things like ratatouille and chicken curry and things like that. They were all in 5-gallon buckets. And there were recipes for that. And, I can follow a recipe. And then they would make, hundreds of crepes all at once, right? And so, once you've done a couple of them, you know how to do it, right? The batter had a recipe. And then you'd go down to the serving kitchen. And if somebody ordered ratatouille crepes, you would take the crepes, you would put some ratatouille in it.
You would.
Well, that was the job, right? They showed me how to do it. And then you microwaved it. And I had never even used a microwave. I didn't really know what a microwave was.
Dentist or
But it worked. And then one day I decided, well, if I'm going to cook, then I should at least make something real, right? So they had a Sunday brunch.
How long was this that you worked there before you figured that out?
Oh, I don't know. I worked there for about a year.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I took on other jobs because, I wanted to learn other stuff at that point because I got really interested. But one day I decided, okay, it's Sunday brunch and they had omelets, but they used the same fillings, right? It was so I decided that instead of, and they would make the omelet shells in the upstairs kitchen, bring them all downstairs, and then you would put it in a filling, roll it, put it in the microwave, serve it up. And I just thought, well, how much better could this be if it was a real omelet? You beat the eggs, you put them in the pan with butter, you make an omelet.
Right.
And I did about 4 or 5 of them and they all came back. Nobody ate them because they were so used to eating like the boiling hot, rubbery eggs from the microwave that having a real omelet was just like,
They didn't know what it was.
They didn't know what it was, right? And so it was about that time that I started looking for other jobs. I got a job. I worked in a luncheonette for a while and doing breakfast and lunch. I worked for a woman who had a natural foods bakery, and I told her that I could, she didn't have any money to pay me, but I really wanted to learn. So I said, anyway, we made this deal. Somehow she paid me a little money and I did her accounting, well, bookkeeping. Now I had never, I'm sure that I had a
Never
check,
done it.
but I had never done it. Math is not my strongest subject, but you know, she was very nice and she was from Denmark and very kind, and her English wasn't that great. So we managed to do that. And then after a while, well, and the reason I was still there was because my friend Sean and I bought some land up in the High Sierra. We bought 10 acres of land that had never been lived on. It had no water, it had no road, it had nothing. It had a little stream and a lot of trees.
And no electricity.
No electricity. And my friend Sean was also, she did car repair, she did carpentry, she was a country girl, and she actually came from near the Hudson Valley. And so she said, okay, you pay the monthly thing, the mortgage on the land, and I'll do the work. And I thought that was a good idea. And because I had to work, because otherwise we couldn't buy lumber or nails.
I
or,
see. Right.
You know. So we lived in a tent for about a year while we were building this house. And I had a pickup truck and I would schlep water back and forth every day from the town, which was about half an hour away. So because we didn't have a well either. And then I would schlep ice because we had to keep the food on ice. And eventually I found a propane refrigerator. So we had a propane refrigerator in the middle of 10 acres with no shelter or nothing. I mean, it was just like refrigerator sitting out in the wild.
Tree refrigerator.
Exactly.
Tree.
Rattlesnakes, dog, cat.
Were there a lot of rattlesnakes?
Yes, there were.
That's really bad.
Well,
You
that's
had
how I learned how to shoot a rifle.
Really?
Yes, I'm a great shot. I used to be. I don't know if I still am, but I killed 2 rattlesnakes in the same day. Because they were trying to get in the tent, and then they were looking, it's like my cat, this is crazy, I know, but my cat blocked the entrance to the tent. I was inside the tent. The cat was just outside the tent.
Because of the
And
rattlesnake?
the rattlesnake was all coiled and ready to go. And I didn't know. I mean, I was like, what the fuck? I have no idea what you're supposed to do. And then I remembered my friend had it. We had a rifle, we had a shotgun, and I took the shotgun and made the cat go away, shooed the cat away, and then shot the rattlesnake.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did it like explode?
Yeah, kind of did, because it was shot. And then, but it was the same weapon also had a bullet, right? So if you wanted to hit well, I was very proud of myself.
I would say so.
I go back in the tent, I clean the gun, and, I do what I'm supposed to do. I reload, I cleaned everything up, put it away. And then I heard the hiss again. And I was like, holy moly, it's not the same one. It was another one, the daddy. I mean, the first one was really big. The second one was huge. And he had been living in our woodpile, apparently. And
he wasn't bothering anybody until,
but I had cats, I had a dog. I was like,
holy
moly, and I was there alone. So I just, loaded up the rifle part, and I just thought, and I got him. One bullet.
One bullet, he died.
One bullet, he died. And then I didn't know what to do. Now I have a dead rattlesnake, right?
That's what I was going to say. Did you?
Well,
burn
there
it
was
up?
a survivalist about at the other end of our 10 acres was his 100 acres. And, you know, he was all fenced in and blockaded, and he had, you know, a bunker that he lived in. And we had met him once, which was in itself quite scary. But, you know, he was a survivalist. He would probably eat anything. So I carried the rattlesnake by his tail and walked through the woods.
Leah,
I did. I walked through the woods and I brought it to the guy, and the guy had these pit bulls that were like screaming and attacking the fence. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to die for this snake. But then the guy comes out, he sees what I'm holding, he calls the dogs off, comes over, and I said, want a snake? And he was so excited. He was going to have snake dinner. But the first thing he did was cut off the rattle and hand it to me, because that was my glory, apparently. It was an old snake.
was
It
it?
had many rattles.
Oh, is that? Oh, I like rings on a tree.
Tree. Or at least that's what he said. I don't really know.
Whatever he knows more than I do.
Right. I never,
Even if
well,
he
plus
made it
he
up,
was a survivalist. I wasn't arguing with him. I was like, okay, I knew that he had weaponry, serious weaponry.
Right.
So anyway, but then, you know, after that, he was very helpful. He cut down the biggest trees that we needed. We had one giant tree that we needed to cut down because otherwise we couldn't build this house. And so he did it for us because the chainsaw he used was taller than I was.
Oh my.
And Sean was a very small person. So anyway, that's how I started cooking. And then,
you would leave the tent and go to work?
yes, you know, we strung up a little shower in the trees, you know, boiled water, did all that kind of stuff. But the place that I worked had a shower. So I would actually take a real shower in town and drink a lot of water. And
How long did you live there?
About a year, little under a year. And then I moved to Sonoma County.
Tell me about that.
And my friend, another friend,
Right.
was working as a waitress. And because she had dropped out of her doctoral program.
Right. I get that.
Right. And so she was working as a waitress. And, you know, I would go and visit her all the time. It was this sort of highway restaurant, you know, called the
Diner?
It was sort of a diner. It was kind of a fancy-ish diner.
Yeah.
But it was called the Greenhouse Restaurant. And people, though, would drive in from the city on weekends for brunch. And so I was always watching, you know, while my friend was waitressing. And then I just thought, you know, I'm looking at the cooks, and they're doing eggs, they're doing burgers, they're doing, you know, all kinds of stuff. And I said, well, I could do that. And so they hired me right away. And I started working there. And then I just thought, okay, now I'm really into it. So now I'm getting really interested. So I'm inventing things and doing what they tell me to do, which was make donuts every morning at 5 a.m. out of Bisquick.
You can make donuts?
Well, these were made out of Bisquick, so it wasn't really making donuts. You
right.
know, you made this little, you know, you basically added water and egg or something.
Well,
and deep fried them. And
how much?
But anyway, you know, I learned a lot more about eggs and flipping eggs and, you know, doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
How do you make fried eggs?
In a pan, non-stick pan.
Oh,
non-stick. And it depended, you know, whether they wanted them sunny side up or over easy. And the woman who I was learning from was very large, very short, and she always wore a purple muumuu.
Okay.
So she's standing in front of this 6-burner range, and then it has a 6-foot griddle to the right, and then, a charbroiler and some other stuff. But I would just watch her with these eggs. She could crack, 4 eggs into a little pan and flip them, and then flip them back and have them be perfectly done. And so that's how I learned how to do eggs.
She put butter in the nonstick pan.
Yeah.
She did.
Well, they didn't use actual butter. They used margarine, of course.
Right. Right.
Anyway, it was a crazy place. But this woman I had been visiting, the waitress, she said, you can go to school to be a cook. And I said, you can go to school to do this?
Right.
She said, yeah, that her brother had been in this, he had gone to CIA apparently, or not CIA, he went to like Sullivan County Community College kitchen, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And but
CIA
then,
is Culinary Institute of America.
Right. And then she told me about the Culinary Institute of America. And so I applied, even though I knew
you're on the West Coast.
Right. And I knew I couldn't afford it. I mean, I was broke. I mean, I didn't really have any money. I had enough money to pay my portion of the rent.
Right.
And, but that was then. And so I applied and I was accepted. And then they sent me the bill, of the tuition statement or whatever. And I was like, holy moly, it was incredibly expensive. To me, it seemed like like I was going to pay to go to Yale or something.
Yeah.
But then I had been an academic for so long. I went straight to the library and I took out what was called the Blue Book at the time. And I sat in the library and I did applications for every possible scholarship I could find in that Blue Book. I got a scholarship for people of Polish descent who lived in Hudson County.
Are you serious?
Yeah. It was $400. But, that was a lot for me. And then Clairol, praise to Clairol, had I applied to their scholarship and it was called for women over 30 entering non-traditional fields. And of course, in those days, there weren't any women in the kitchens. I mean, a little bit in California, but not much. And in New York City, there was one woman in New York City who owned her own restaurant. And other than that, it was all men. And I had worked at that point at the Culinary Institute. I knew I wasn't going to, well, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, I applied for that and they gave it to me and it paid for an entire semester. And anyway, so I played the scholarship game. I got several scholarships for the first half. And then I got a merit scholarship for the second half from Tabasco. And I have never lived a day without Tabasco in my refrigerator.
Right. I'll go buy some.
Even when I make my own hot sauce, I still have Tabasco hot sauce in my refrigerator. Right.
They have a boat in the Caribbean that's the color of Tabasco. It's a gorgeous boat and it's Tabasco and it's that color. It's crazy. So go ahead. They sound interesting.
Right. So, so then I did the culinary and I was one of very, very few women in the school. And the male chefs there was one woman teaching at that point and she taught culinary French. So she wasn't cooking, she was teaching French.
Oh.
Yeah. And then there was one woman chef and I never even saw her because there were day shifts and night shifts. And but some of these guys, there was one guy that I was a teacher, one of my instructors, and he actually had an SS tattoo on his arm. And the president of the school was from Austria, and the place was filled with Germans and Austrians. There was one Italian chef.
Really? The Culinary Institute?
Well, it's different now. I mean, this was in, I graduated in 1983. So
Well,
that was a long time ago. But I mean, it was crazy. It was really crazy. And I had a part-time job, of course, in the admissions office. And I went and complained to the president of the school. I said, look, this guy, he's stealing from you. I watched him put a whole London broil in his suitcase and to take home. And then I said, he made Nazi jokes. I mean, he said, we're going to celebrate Hitler's birthday today, all Jews in the oven.
no,
Yes, he did. I left the room. I went to the president of the school. He said, oh, he was just joking.
he was just joking.
He was just joking. So
What happened?
Culinary Institute was very challenging.
No.
But then, in the middle of your first and last terms, there's a 6-month externship, they call it, where you go someplace else and work in an actual restaurant. And the one that I picked, because I didn't want to work in a New York City hotel or one of those things, because I watched my instructors, all who had worked at the Waldorf Astoria and the thises and the that's, and they were proud of how miserable they would be. I had one chef who used to take salt pills all during the day because there would be a puddle of his sweat under his feet. And I was like, that is absurd. And he was proud of that. And so the male students all thought, yay, we're going to, yeah. So I decided I would go back to California. I found an externship that was at Green's at Fort Mason, which is a vegetarian restaurant. And I sent in my resume and they accepted me, although they had never had an extern before. But when I actually got there, the general manager said the only reason they decided to take me was it was the first time they had received a resume that had no misspellings and that was grammatically correct.
Really? I love it.
So studying English, see, it has great benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just want to say something. You spoke, I mean, you have 2 first languages, Italian and English.
Right.
You have no accent. None. But I want to get back to this.
Okay, but Jersey City comes out sometimes.
Oh, that more than the Roman Italian.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, so you went back.
So I went back. I did my 6 months at Green's, and during that time, it was a Buddhist run restaurant.
Oh.
And so every once in a while, I think it was twice during that 6-month period, they had a retreat called a sesshin, and they would all go to Tassajara, which was their property.
I know Tassajara.
Right. And they would all go away and close the restaurant. And so they would send me over to Chez Panisse to work in the kitchen there.
Wow.
Because the chef at the time at Green's, Deborah Madison, had worked there. And so they were good friends, and Alice was really good friends with the Green's restaurant. And so I would just go and, do whatever they told me to do. And
you must have learned a lot there.
I did, but I also learned in both of those places that none of those people were trained. So a lot of seat of the pants, right? And when I was working at Green's, and they made a new soup every day, but they didn't have a stock. They didn't know how to make a vegetable stock at the time. And here we are in a restaurant that is all vegetables, right? And cheese, but tons of vegetables, and they have all these trimmings, and they weren't making stock out of it. So that was my first contribution. And anyway,
No, I love this, but Chez Panisse, I mean, that's just not. I'm sure they don't take everybody who needs a job for 6 months or something.
No. but I only was there. I mean, I would be there for like a week at a time. It wasn't like I was, they weren't paying me or anything. I was just, I would, peel fava beans on the back steps and,
Oh, right.
all kinds of things like that. It wasn't really, but, I got to be there. I got to see the produce. I got to meet the farmers. I got, and
It's fun. Was it wonderful?
it was cool. It was cool. But, I started learning many things about restaurants, and about hierarchies. And I had never been willing to participate in those kinds of things. But even in a kitchen like Chez Panisse and Greens, which, they were different than most other restaurants, but there was still, there's always the chef. There's always the captain of the brigade. And, and it is what it is. And, somebody needs to be in charge. That's the thing. This whole thing that goes on TV where they're all saying, chef this and chef that, and yes, chef, no chef. I never worked in a place like that. Neither Greens nor Chez Panisse or other places. And when I was the chef of a restaurant, my name was Leah. And if they wanted something, they said Leah.
Dr. Chef.
Right.
Your
Not
Highness.
Chef Leah. Right. So, and then after I graduated, I came back to California. I went back to California.
So you did get that degree?
I did. I finished it. And with great honors, well, with some honors. If I had been willing to sleep with some of my chef instructors, I would have gotten fullest honors and a scholarship, but
didn't work that way.
Didn't work that way for me. Anyway, so then I went back to Greens at Fort Mason and they hired me immediately. And I worked there for, I don't know, almost 2 years. And then I was just like, okay, I'm done here. I can't learn anything more about vegetables in this place. And so they sent me to Chez Panisse. And then they gave me a job. I did my audition and they did look at my resume.
What's
an
audition?
An audition is just a tryout. It's like you cook food for the principals.
Did they ask you to cook a certain dish or do you make your own? Oh, they did.
They asked me to cook a certain dish and it was a pasta dish. So,
Yeah.
And everybody liked it and they hired me on the spot. But I was living in Sonoma County, which was, about an hour away each way. And at the time, the shift was, it was an 8-hour shift, but you had to get there a minimum of an hour in advance.
Sure.
Unpaid. And then stay a minimum of an hour for cleanup and prep and things like that. So, it was a 10 or 12-hour day. I was making, at the time, I was making $8 an hour.
Right.
And I had to drive myself. I had to drive in every day and drive back. So gas took up. And I was still driving my green pickup truck. So I wasn't doing very well financially.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then sometimes they'd ask me questions. Somebody else, another cook would ask me questions. And I'd be like, really? You don't know that? I mean, I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. Because there were a lot of people who were, a lot of the other people who worked there, they didn't come from restaurant backgrounds. They had PhDs and master's degrees, and they came from families with money, and they were privileged people for the most part. And that just wasn't my scene. No. So I quit, and I got hired by a couple who owned a bookstore in town in Petaluma. And he had run a very well-known bar restaurant in San Francisco. So I knew he knew about the business. And the woman she had a bookstore in Petaluma. So she wasn't a cook really, but they hired me and they said, we want a restaurant and, can you come up with a menu? And so I wound up designing the kitchen and
starting a brand new restaurant.
started a brand new restaurant, and it was, it was only, I don't know, 65 seats or something, which is, the barest minimum for making any money. And we were in this small town in Northern California, but, we got the critic from San Francisco, and we got, mentioned in we got picked in Gourmet Magazine when it existed. And so it was really going well, and they were paying me much more money. I was getting $10 an hour now.
Oh my God.
And I asked them to put me on salary because this hourly thing was just driving me crazy. But they refused to put me on salary. I mean, I wasn't asking for much more than I was already getting. But they wouldn't let me have any access to the financials. So I didn't know what our food cost was. I didn't know, how were they paying that woman that they hired, who was a friend of theirs. And, I didn't know why she was getting paid. And she was working in my kitchen. And anyway,
Right.
Then they hired a prep person who was somebody's daughter who grew up in Northern California, and she had never seen an artichoke. And, we were half an hour from Half Moon Bay, where they grow like half the artichokes in California.
Right.
So anyway, they said, no, we're not going to give you a salary. And I said, well, then I think I'll do something else. Because the guy said, well, what do you think you do that nobody else can do? And I said, well, I just designed this kitchen. I put the whole thing together. I got you in Gourmet Magazine. But they called Gourmet and said that the woman who they had hired to be my assistant, they said that she was the chef instead of me. And so at that point, I just walked out and started thinking about, well, now what? But I did love the idea of opening restaurants. It was really fun. It's a million details. It's hard work, but it's other people's money.
Yeah, OPM.
And that became my motto, OPM, other people's money. Because everybody would say, oh, Leah, you should write a cookbook. You should open a restaurant. You should do all these things. And I said, OPM, baby, that's it. Because everybody lost money. That particular restaurant that I started, where they say, what do you do that nobody else can do? They went bankrupt within months.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. They were out of business. And they didn't have enough to start with. I mean, when they were just finishing up the build, right? We were getting ready to open. And the health inspector came by. And there was only one bathroom. It was a small place, and it was in a building that only had one bathroom. And the health inspector said, well, you can't have just one bathroom. And they said, well, that's all that is allowed. And he said, okay, well, then you need to put in a urinal for the men. Because apparently men can't use a toilet. Maybe their aim is really bad.
What do they do in their own homes? But in any event.
Anyway, but what happened though is that they were working with such a tight budget that the owner had to sell his vintage Porsche
Oh,
to pay for the urinal.
oh, how
I love that. I love that. I put a picture on the night before we opened. I cut out a picture of a white Porsche and taped it in the urinal.
So every time he went in there?
Well, he tore it down, obviously, after the first visit,
Right,
but
minute.
I thought it was really funny.
So then what? God.
Oh, God. So then what? The person who had started Greens at Fort Mason was a Buddhist monk. And he got into trouble with his followers and his whole community for, screwing around and spending too much money and blah, blah. That's a whole other story. But he moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and wanted to do the same thing. Wanted to open another restaurant like that with a bakery. And So he hired me to fly out, move to Santa Fe, which I did. And he had a great, I mean, he had money because one of his, the person who was paying for it was a very well-known, very rich East Coast family. But then this guy, the guy I was working for, started doing bad things with artwork and moving artwork across state lines. And I don't know, there was all kinds of stuff. And then one day the CFO knocked at my door, and because we lived next door to each other. And he said, I think you should pack up and go away right away, because you're never getting paid again because there's no money. And I don't know if what's his name is going to wind up in jail or what, but his benefactor has completely pulled out. So the restaurant didn't actually open while I was there. But I had hired an assistant chef and a floor manager from California and brought them out. So I just left them. I said, you guys deal with it, because I was too involved and they were just employees. I was already,
Jeez.
I was afraid that I could get into trouble. They wouldn't, right? Because they had nothing to do with finances or anything. So, and then I went back to California. And I mean, it just kind of went on and on. People are crazy in the restaurant
People are
business.
crazy.
I mean, people are all crazy, but if you're crazy and you're making people work, 14, 16, 18 hours
crazy.
a day, 7 days a week, it's just,
No.
yeah. I mean,
I want to
ahead.
ask you, I interrupted. You were going to say something. Do you want to finish it?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I guess, so you're a chef,
Yes.
and what's the difference between someone who really cooks well and someone who's a chef? Even if you're at a chef in someone's home, what's the difference?
Training,
Is it
skill.
training?
Yeah. And it's not just, I mean, there are many, many good cooks, and maybe they have recipes, maybe they just skim cookbooks for fun and they like to cook. But being a chef is about managing people and managing tools and equipment and knowing how
You're the
to,
captain of the ship.
right, and knowing what to buy and how to buy it and how much to buy it. And, where do you get the best prices, and, all of that other stuff. And then, since all these TV shows happened,
Yeah.
chef this, chef that, and,
Yeah.
all these men
Your Highness.
screaming horrible things.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh my God, this is pathetic. This is just really sad. And I just started pulling away from it, because I was just like, people would say, Leah, if you had a PR agent, then, you could be doing that, and you could have your own TV show, and you
Right.
could, and I
You
was just
could.
like, you know what?
You could.
I like to cook. I like to feed people. I don't need to be on TV. I mean, I just don't. I never have. I didn't want to be, sort of an appendage, somebody like a puppet, right? That people can bounce up and down, and say what you're told to say, or, or just be a complete jerk, like some of these men.
Did you learn to, I know, and women, did you learn to cook in, like, from your mother, the Italian, like, is that like your specialty?
It's the food that is closest to me. It's the food that I love the most, because it means things to me.
Right.
It's about family and sitting around the table, and, my family in Italy, who I only see, every once in a while. And my mother had always had her own business. She had a dress shop, a boutique. And so she didn't really have time to cook. But on Sunday, which was her only day off, she would, we always had Sunday dinner at the table. And, she made roast chicken. She made very good roast chicken. And we'd have, and she would try and, fancy up a couple of vegetables and things. But other than that, I had an aunt who lived downstairs from us, who was my father's brother's wife. And she was a really good cook. And, when she was making fresh pasta, she had sheets all over the house, clean white sheets. And she'd lay that pasta out everywhere. And she did not use a little machine like I use. She just had a big rolling pin and she would just whip that stuff out. And it was amazing. But, as she got older, her cooking was less amazing. And as many things happen to us as we age.
Many weird things that you never.
Many weird things. That's right.
To be able to do this. So if you were going to make a dinner for tonight, and I'm coming, but I mean, if we were going to be 6 of us,
but you're a vegetarian.
We'll see.
Right?
Brought that up. Yeah, I am.
Right. And then we have somebody else who doesn't want to eat gluten. Okay. And one of the things about cooking in a restaurant is that you have many choices as a chef of what you're going to do. I mean, if you're in charge. So, if somebody's can't eat the soup because there was chicken stock in it, well, it's not such a big deal to make that person something else, mushroom soup or something else, and not use stock and use milk or use whatever, something else. And so that's easy. When it's at my house, I have to plan ahead, because if I was going to make, I don't know, if I was going to make risotto, for example, I usually make it with chicken broth because that's how one generally makes it. But if I was cooking it for you, I would make a vegetable broth in advance, but I might have to cook yours separately because of the ingredients, and it's never going to be as good because it needs a richness that, you don't get from a vegetable stock. And so that whole umami thing doesn't happen very easily with vegetarian food.
What's umami?
Umami is a kind of, it's a taste thing that is sort of meat-like. It's not that it's meat, and it's not a meat substitute. It's like mushrooms have a lot of umami.
I see.
And
I hear you.
Yeah. So they have deep flavor that is really wonderful. But if you're, and so, if I'm doing it in a restaurant, it's really easy. And I've had crazy requests but it doesn't bother me. I don't mind, this person at that table needs this, that one needs that. But, if I know that if I'm cooking in a restaurant, I always have vegetarian stuff available. I have, vegan stuff. Well, not anymore, but I'm retired. But, you have to, that's just part of being a chef. You have to think ahead, plan ahead. And, and if you're just, or you work in a restaurant that doesn't believe in bending, you're a steakhouse and they don't want to eat the whatever, then they'll just eat a baked potato and creamed spinach. But if they're vegan, they can just have the plain baked potato.
Right.
Whereas I never did that. I would always think ahead so that I always knew if someone comes in and they have that request, then here are some things I can make with just what I have on hand.
I mean, having been like this and not eating meat when I was a kid, I didn't like milk so it's been for so long, and you can tell when somebody slapped something together, but it's not meat. So pretty much it's okay. I mean, every once in a while, if there's creamed spinach, it's okay. but I
Right.
guess people can give you a hard time.
But, it depends on, and it of course depends on the person, it's like, I know that, for example, that you'll eat anything I give you that's
Yeah.
vegetarian. And you're not going to say, oh, well, I don't like chickpeas and I don't
Oh,
like,
no,
no, you're not going to do that.
no.
But I have had people in the past who have been like that. And they were vegetarians, but they would still eat fish, but not at my house because they were vegetarians. So I would cook them vegetarian things. And sometimes I would just make sure that the entire dinner was vegetarian, which, I worked in a vegetarian restaurant. That was not so hard. And I would even do, very time consuming, lengthy dishes that would take me 2 days to make, but I made them vegetarian instead of putting in meat. And, and they would be successful. They would be a lot of fun. But it's nothing I would have made in a restaurant.
No, I
I
hear
would
it.
have had to hire another person.
It's so funny because people for so many years have said, so you're a lacto pescatarian. And I said, it's not like that. Just stop that. I'm not anything. I mean, it's the factory farming. I mean, it's beyond what I want to be a part of. And end of story. Chickens, beef, whatever. And I do eat fish, which someone said you shouldn't eat nothing with eyes. But it's just total. I mean, I'm like that. And it's not, I mean, my kids eat it. My kids both eat meat. They didn't get the memo.
Right. Well, I spent many years as a vegetarian, but when I went to the Culinary Institute, I stopped because I said, if I'm paying whatever it was, $35,000 to go to this stupid school, then I'm going to eat whatever they put in front of me because I have to learn how to cook it.
35,000. Wow.
I don't remember how much it really was now. Now it's like 40. And I thought, my college, I went to Rutgers University.
Oh,
It
did
was
you?
$400.
Yeah.
400.
Geez, 35,000.
Yeah. It
I
might
am,
be more than that
I am
now.
so happy we did this. Did you enjoy it?
I have enjoyed it.
Yeah. I mean, we're not done.
Right. Well, you and I can talk endlessly though.
We can. But this is so interesting. So we're gonna leave. It's an hour. I love it. We're gonna leave this. I mean, maybe we can pick it up and do part 2 if you want to do that, because you've done some other interesting things. But between shooting a rattlesnake and working at Chez Panisse, I mean, put that all together. That's fantastic. Can you imagine
Oh,
doing any of the shooting a rattlesnake right now? Yeah. If you were in a tent and there was a rattlesnake,
of course
I
I
would
would.
shoot it.
Right. If I was being threatened, of course I would.
Yeah, I would too. Wow. Well, I'm going to leave you now. So we're talking to Leah Bergen, who is Italian, Jewish, chef, my girlfriend. I'm so happy I met you. I
Me
mean that.
too.
If
Me
they
too.
had done like a thing where what are they called that takes pictures, above, they had like gone all over the country and said, you're going to move and this person's going to live near you because this is going to be somebody you're finally feel so comfortable with. So
Yay.
yay us. All right, Leah Bergen, thank
Okay,
you so
honey.
much.
Thank you. Thanks so
Okay,
much.
it was great.
Bye,
Bye.
Betty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.